Hello. So today we're going to take the Airbus from its cold and dark state where the aircraft is completely turned off up to its turnaround state where it's powered on and ready to be set up for a flight. During this video I'll be referring to some documentation which comes with the Aerosoft A320. You can access the documents folder through the start menu and then you should have an option which says Aerosoft-Airbus A320-A321. That will take you to a folder which looks like this. I'm going to be using volume 6 step by step in English. So I'm using this document because some of the other documents and procedure guides I found to be inconsistent or they lacked continuity, so the step by step guide will be the best for learning this aircraft. Okay, so I believe that the first time you load the aircraft in FSX or prepared, it defaults to a turnaround state. So first of all we have to get the aircraft into its cold and dark state. So to do that we need to have a look at the second MCDU which is down here. So to change the aircraft state, what you can do is you can hit on the top left hand button here to go into the aircraft state options here. Now you can see on the left hand side here we have the different states that we can load the aircraft into. You have cold and dark where the aircraft is completely powered off. You have turnaround where the aircraft is powered on but not been set up for flight yet. You have taxi where the aircraft has been prepared and ready to head out to the runway, and then you've got takeoff where the aircraft is ready to take off. On the right hand side here you can set several defaults, so anytime you load the plane it will automatically default to this state, and you can also clear the default at the bottom. So at the moment you can see that I've got the aircraft loaded in its turnaround state because it's highlighted in green, and the default state, so every time I start the simulator and load this aircraft it defaults to being cold and dark. So if I want to set the aircraft to cold and dark now, all I do is hit cold and dark here, and you can see now that all of the screens have been turned off, and you can also hear that a lot of the fans and cooling systems have also been turned off in the plane there. So the plane is now completely powered off and ready for us to set it up. Okay, so the first few steps that we're going to do is going to be activating the electrical systems within the plane. So this just gets an active electrical supply going just so we can start to set up the plane and start doing some more actions within the cockpit here. So for this I'm going to be using page 41 of that document there, and if you have a look at that page you'll see it's chapter 5.2, the basic preparation procedure. Now this procedure makes use of some other features and some other small programs which come with the Aerosoft Airbus. For this video I'm not going to be using those, however this video is not going to take away from setting up the plane at all. I will cover some of those extra features in another video, but for this one we're just going to focus on getting the plane powered on and getting ready to fly. So if you have a look at the sort of the checklists there, steps 1 and 2 relate to these features which I'm not going to talk about here. So the first thing we need to do is step 3, which is to turn the battery switches master 1 and 2 on. So let's have a look at the overhead panel here, and let me just zoom in. So the two battery master switches are here, so you've got 1 and 2 in the middle. So the first thing to do is turn both of those on. So do that by clicking on them, and you see we get a few more extra lights and buttons there. You can also hear a little bit of a few cooling fans going as well. So the next step is to enable the external power for the plane. So if you have a look outside of the plane you can see that there's a little mobile generator which usually sits at the front of the plane and plugs in somewhere near the nose. So what that is doing is that is supplying electrical power to the plane. Now we can enable this external power by clicking on the external power button here. You can see that we've got a little green available there. Let me just, whoops, daisies. Let me just zoom in there. You can see it says avail there. So that means that the external power is available to the plane. So we just hit that button and you see that it lights up in blue there. So it lights up in blue because it's an auxiliary system. It's an extra system there. You can hear the cooling fans also kick in. So the external power is now working fine there. The next step is to switch on the nav lights. So we can come down to the bottom here, the external lights, and switch on the nav lights. So pilots or maintenance crews will often switch on the navigation lights because it tells other people on the ground that people are inside the plane and currently working within the plane. It's kind of like a way to signal to people on the ground that people are on board and working in the plane. So steps 6, 7 and 8 all relate to the glass cockpit displays here. So we can turn on the primary flight display, turn that on to bright. We can turn the navigation display onto bright, and then turn on both the upper and lower ECAMs there, using their brightness controls there. The next step calls for the integrated lights, so these are the two lights switches down here. We don't need to use these because it is daytime, but if I flick those, you can see it's those buttons which give the sort of the orange back glow to each panel there. So we don't need it because it's currently daytime, but if it was darker outside, then you would use that, obviously. Steps 10 to 15 all relate to features that I'm not going to be covering in this video. And then for step 16, we can head over to MCDU number 2 again. And this step asks us to start entering some fuel and weight information. So we've got the MCDU2 menu here. So if you click on the button next to load/fuel, you can see that it brings us to this page. Now on this page, what we need to do is enter the number of passengers that we're going to be flying with, the amount of cargo that we're going to be flying with in metric tons, and also the weight of fuel that we're going to be flying with metric tons. So I'm just going to use some random values just now. So let's say that we're going to fly with 120 passengers. So you type in 120, you see the number goes into the scratch pad there. And then just click the button next to PAX, which is short for passengers, and you see the number gets entered there. We're not going to be flying with any cargo, so we'll just put 0 in there. And then let's say we're going to be taking 7 tons of fuel, so 7.0, or 7,000 kilograms of fuel. Put that in there. Now you'll notice that we got boarding and fuel lit up in orange there. So now we have an option to start either boarding passengers or loading fuel. Now when you're boarding passengers, you need to be aware that the doors on the aircraft need to be open for passengers to start boarding. The same with cargo. There are several cargo doors on the aircraft that need to be opened, and for fuel you can just load that in manually. There is also an option here, the fourth option here is for load instant. So if you don't want to wait for passengers to board or for fuel to load, if you hit that load instant button, that will immediately adds the weight of 120 passengers and 7 tons of fuel to the aircraft. But what we'll do, however, is we'll take a look at loading fuel. So if we click on load fuel there, you see that it starts flashing in green, and you'll see that we have the maximum amount of fuel we can add, which is 19.15 tons. And you can see we have actual, and you can see that actual is starting to rise slowly. So that means that fuel is slowly being pumped into the plane, essentially. Now, if we wanted to manipulate the doors on the aircraft, what we can do is we can hit return, so it brings us back to the main menu. The second button here has aircraft doors, so you can click on that, and you can see which doors are open and which doors are closed. So the front left and the aft left doors are both passenger doors, so you would open these to allow passengers to board. The front right and the aft right are also passenger doors, so you can open those to enable passengers to board as well. If you're using an external or a mod or an add-on software like which kind of replicates ground vehicles joining, you can also introduce service carts, so things like food carts and any passengers with disabilities, they are usually loaded in through the right hand side doors as well. And also below those you can see you have your 2 cargo doors there, so you can open those there, and it's very easy, it's just an open and close there. In my personal experience, sometimes the buttons don't register click, so you might need to click on them 1 or twice to get it to recognise there. And also, when you're using the doors page on the MCDU here, it's often good just confirming which doors are open and which doors are closed on the ECAM display here. So if we use the aft left door for an example, if we open that, you can see that it highlights it on the ECAM display here, and it shows us which doors are open and which doors are closed. And that concludes the first few steps for setting up the plane. So let's move on to the next procedure. So the next procedure is on page 42 of that document, and it's chapter 5.3, and it's called Cockpit Preparation. Now the first few steps are things that we've already done, but what I'm going to do is just keep to the nature of this video and go through step by step just so we can follow it along. So the first step, or the first couple of steps, are to check the battery master switch. So if we go up here and have a look here, so we can double check the battery master switches, those are both on. Double check external power, you can see it's lit up in blue there and it says on. And then also double check the nav lights and make sure that is switched on as well. Next we check the engine master switches, so we make sure that both 1 and 2 are selected off. So these are both down at the moment, they're both set to off. After that we need to check the engine mode selector, which is this knob just below the two switches there, and make sure that is set in the middle to normal. Next we check that the landing gear lever is down, which it is. Next we come back down to the pedestal and make sure that the parking brake is off. So while the plane is parked, it will be held in place by chocks, the triangular shaped blocks which sit in front of and behind the tyre. So that just makes sure that obviously that the plane's not going to roll away while it's parked. After the parking brake, we make sure that the flaps lever is in the 0 position, or flaps up position there. And then after that we make sure that the speed brake is retracted and disarmed. So you can arm and disarm the speed brakes by right clicking on the lever there. You hear it clunk and it moves up slightly, so that's the armed position. Right click it again and you see it's in the retracted position there and disarmed. Next, make sure that the thrust levers are at idle. So I've just switched to a side view here so you can see the detent system there. You can see the little notch in the side of the thrust levers there. You can see it's at the 0 or idle position. The next thing to do is to make sure that the transponder is in the standby mode. So this is the transponder here. So the easiest way to do this is to just put your mouse cursor over the mode selector knob here and just roll your mouse wheel towards you, backwards towards you, and you'll see that it says ATC there. So if it's any other mode, it will say ATC 1, but when it's in standby, it will just say ATC there. After that, turn on the radio panels, like so. The next step is to check the ECAM recall. So if we go to the ECAM control page just above the thrust levers here, you can see we have a button here which says RCL, which is recall. So you just click that once and just make sure and have a look to see if there's any messages that pop up here. After you check the ECAM, make sure that the anti-skid switch is in the on position, which is up, which is good. And then lastly, on the glare shield, make sure that the flight director is enabled. So make sure it's got a green light there. So back to the overhead panel, the first thing we need to do is arm the emergency lights. So emergency lights are down in the bottom right here. Flick those up into arm and you'll see the off light goes off, which is what we want. Next, make sure that the no smoking lights are on, like so. After that, we make sure that the anti-ice systems are all off. So you notice, if we turn them on, we get the blue light again there to indicate that they're on. So just make sure that all of them are off. Beside that, we have the probe and window heat. Again, we want to make sure that system is off. So make sure that there's no blue light, and that means it's in the automatic or off position. Above that, on the air conditioning panel, we want to make sure that all of these systems are switched on or ready to be used. So we've got pack 1 and engine 1 bleeds, both need to be on. You notice there, if we click the buttons, they switch to off. So we want to make sure that they are all on. The same with engine 2 and pack 2 and hot air. The only thing that should be switched off at the moment is the APU bleed. Now you'll notice that we get fault indications on pack 1 and 2. That is completely normal at this stage of the flight. That's because the engines are not running, so the packs are not functioning properly at the moment, which, as I said, is completely to be expected at this point. After that, the checklist or the procedure asks us to check the blower and extraction fans. Unfortunately, these are a couple of the buttons that you cannot click on, so everything is working fine over there by default. Next, we make sure that both the generators are switched on. So again, these are buttons which light up when they are switched off. So you just click them, switch them on, and again they show fault lights, and again that is perfectly normal at this stage of the flight because the engines are not running, so the engine generators are not producing any electrical power because the engines are not running. Also at this point we want to make sure that the APU generator is also switched on, so again that lights up if it's off and it's not lit up when it's working. After the electrical panel, we just want to make sure that all of the fuel pumps are switched on. So you just switch on all of these and all of the fuel pumps are ready to be used. Now the next step, we need to switch on the electric hydraulic pump. So that's this button on the right hand side of the hydraulics panel here, and you'll notice down in the bottom left corner I've got another camera looking at the acupressure gauge. So what we want to do is we want to increase the acupressure here just to the right of the landing gear lever. So we switch on that electrical pump, or sorry, the hydraulic pump, electrical hydraulic pump. Pressure rises, and we get the barking dog there. So now we've got brake pressure ready to be used there. After that, we want to check the ground proximity warning system, and we just want to make sure that all of these systems are on. So again, when they're switched off, they'll light up and show as being switched off, so we just want to make sure that all of those are on. The only thing that needs to be switched off at the moment is this landing flap 3 setting here, which is a bit of a kind of a special setting there, so just make sure that all of these lights here are extinguished. After that, we want to check the flight control computers and make sure that they're all on. Now again, these are several buttons which you cannot click on, so by default all of these will be working fine. And then finally, on the upper overhead panel, we want to make sure that the ADIRS system is enabled. So we go to each of these 3 knobs and switch them onto nav. Switch it to nav, make sure on battery comes on and then disappears. So all of the ADIRS systems are now currently aligning. They take about 5 minutes to sort of warm up, in quotation marks there. So give it 5 minutes and then those will be ready to go. Okay, and you'll notice that after we've set the ADIRS systems up, we'll get a little notice on the ECAM here which says IR in alignment in 5 minutes. So as time goes by, you'll see how long it takes for the IRS systems to align there. So they'll go to 5 minutes, to 4 minutes, to 3 minutes, and so on until all of the systems are aligned. And then after that, in the real world, what pilots would do is check all of their emergency equipment. So make sure they've got a fire extinguisher. They would make sure that they've got their life vests in some of these cupboards here. Make sure their oxygen masks are all working okay. And then after that, you would set your radios. If you're going to fly with air traffic control, you would set your radio frequencies in just now, just to make it easy to flick between them, between taxi, takeoff, and departure. Usually I don't fly with air traffic control, but you would set up your radio frequencies at this point. And then after you set your radio frequencies, if you were flying with air traffic control, what you would then do is request clearance. So you would speak to air traffic control, they would give you some information about your initial departure and give you clearance to depart at a specific time. Okay, and that about covers everything from bringing the aircraft from cold and dark up to a turnaround state. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at these 2 glass cockpit displays here and thinking, why aren't they showing any information? Why aren't they showing me what I would expect to see? Well, this is what I'm gonna start covering in the next video, but I'll touch upon this just now. So you'll notice on the MCDU here, we've got a little message in the scratch pad here which says reset IRS to nav. So what we need to do is we need to tell the flight management system to kind of lock on to the IRS system as well. So the first thing that you do when you're looking at the MCDU is you want to check to make sure that the engines are what you actually have installed on the plane, and also check your nav data to make sure that it's up to date. Now, a lot of people when they're flight simming may have data which is out of date. That's not a problem at all, but just be aware that this is what pilots do in the real world, is they check the rating of the engines and also check the date of the nav data which is installed on the plane. So in the Airbus, what you do is you click on the init page, this button here, and then what you can do is you see that it says align IRS here, so that's the third button down. If we click on that third button there, then what will happen is once the IRS systems have warmed up and they've discovered the plane's location and they've got the plane's attitude and everything set, what will happen is these displays will sort of pop into life, and you'll come up and show us everything that we expect to see. There we go, so you can see that the screen's just kind of popped into existence now there. So you can see now we have our attitude indicator with the speed and the altitude tapes there, and our nav display looks a lot more like something we would expect. So as I said, that's going to be something that I'm going to cover in the next video, is all of the FMS and MCDU work down here. We'll cover that in the next video. But for now, thank you all very much for watching. Take care out there, and I will catch you all later.